It was just another Tuesday morning at Ridgeview Community Bank. Quiet, predictable, and slow. That is, until a soft-spoken man stepped in, his hands trembling as he approached the counter. He wore a worn army jacket and walked with the careful grace of someone used to pain. When he handed over his ID and tried to steady his check, the teller smirked. "Maybe come back when your hands work," she said loudly, drawing glances from everyone in line. He didn't respond. But 6 minutes later, the regional manager walked in, and the entire branch fell silent. The automatic doors of Ridgeview Community Bank opened with a soft whoosh, letting in the crisp morning air, and a man who moved like he didn't want to bother anyone. His name was Henry Lawson, a 68-year-old Army veteran with silver in his hair and pain in his bones. He wore a faded olive green jacket, the kind handed out to medics in Afghanistan, though the patch on the shoulder was barely readable now. On the left side of his chest, above the pocket, a name tag had long since fallen off, leaving only a few loose threads. Henry's hands trembled as he approached the queue. It wasn't from age. It was nerve damage, severe tremors from a roadside IED blast in Helmand Province that nearly ended his life 14 years ago. Since then, some things never came back. Fine motor control, peaceful sleep, and a sense of belonging in the world he once defended. He clutched a crumpled envelope tightly in one hand, his monthly disability check, and with the other, he carefully held a cane, one of those metal ones with the four-pronged base, better for balance. The moment he stepped into the bank, he scanned the room the way only a soldier would, reading exits, noting who was behind him, making sure he wasn't in anyone's way. There were 5 people ahead of him in line, a young mother with a toddler, a businessman tapping impatiently on his phone, a retired couple chatting softly, and a high school senior still in his track hoodie. They barely noticed Henry at first. He didn't take up much space, didn't demand attention. That was how he liked it. Brenda, the teller behind the counter, had already been eyeing the clock and sighing loudly even before Henry walked in. She looked to be in her early 30s, with sharp makeup and a sharper tone. She'd already rolled her eyes at the toddler who had accidentally dropped a cracker. Now, with Henry slowly making his way to the front, she braced herself as if an inconvenience was arriving. When it was finally Henry's turn, he moved forward gingerly, hands shaking more now. Not from nerves, but from effort. The strain of standing in line, the cold from outside, and the tension in the air made it worse. He gently placed the check on the counter, followed by his ID card, which slipped from his grip the first time and fluttered to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, slowly, carefully. No one moved to help him. Brenda looked down at the ID, barely hiding her annoyance. "You okay there, sir?" she asked, not with concern, but with that sharp-edged sarcasm some people master. Henry gave a tired smile. "Yes, ma'am, just the hands. They don't cooperate some mornings." Brenda took the check, glancing at it like it smelled funny. "All right, I'll just need a signature on the back." Henry nodded and reached into his coat pocket for a pen. It took him several seconds to grasp it. He placed the check down and held it with one hand while trying to steady his dominant hand enough to sign. The pen bobbed slightly in his grip. That's when Brenda gave a short, dry laugh and said, loud enough for everyone in the bank to hear, "Take your time, sweetie. Or do you want me to sign it for you too?" The room seemed to pause. Henry stopped mid-signature. He didn't look up. He just gave a faint nod and resumed writing, even slower now. The line behind him stiffened. The young mother with the toddler looked down at her child and whispered something under her breath. The teenager in the hoodie looked up from his phone. The check was signed eventually. The pen was returned. Still, Brenda didn't stop. She turned slightly to the younger teller at the next window and said with an exaggerated sigh, "Every month it's the same story. Some of them just can't keep up anymore." Henry's ears picked it up. He heard everything. Years in the military had tuned him to catch whispers others would miss. But he said nothing. No anger, no rebuttal. Only quiet dignity. He cleared his throat and offered a polite, "Thank you for your time." Brenda gave a forced smile and pushed the money through the slot without looking him in the eye. "Have a great day," she said, clearly meaning the opposite. Henry gently placed the cash into his wallet with slow, practiced motions. He turned, adjusted his grip on his cane, and began the long walk toward the exit. He moved like a man used to carrying invisible weight, the kind of weight people don't see, the kind that never gets easier with time. As he passed the line of customers, none of them spoke, but some of their eyes followed him. Quietly ashamed they didn't step in, quietly hoping someone would. Just as Henry reached the door, he heard the distant sound of a second entrance opening, the side door used by management. He glanced back casually, not expecting much. What he saw was a sharply dressed woman in a tailored blazer, flanked by an assistant holding a clipboard. She was moving with purpose, her eyes locked not on him, but on the counter where Brenda stood. Henry stopped near the threshold. Something in her face told him this wasn't just another manager doing rounds. Brenda hadn't noticed the woman who had just stepped into the bank. She was too busy scrolling through her phone in between customers, acting like the job was a favor to humanity. The moment Henry Lawson stepped away from her counter, she muttered something under her breath again, this time with more venom. "Guy's probably been coming here since checks were carved in stone," she snorted, just loud enough for her colleague to hear. The younger teller, Melissa, gave a forced smile, visibly uncomfortable, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. The customers in line weren't as silent anymore. The teenager in the hoodie shifted his weight, frowning slightly. The young mother picked up her toddler and moved a little closer to the counter, clearly wanting to overhear what would happen next. The older couple, who'd been chatting quietly earlier, had both gone silent. Henry was still within earshot, moving slowly toward the door. He paused at the exit, not out of indecision but fatigue. He leaned slightly on the cane, letting the tremor in his hand settle before opening the door. That's when he heard it. Brenda again, this time to no one in particular. You'd think someone with that kind of disability would just use online banking or stay home, honestly. We're not a therapy center. The words hit Henry harder than the cold air outside. His shoulders straightened, but he didn't turn around. He'd been called worse, in boot camp, in hospitals, on the battlefield, but somehow this stung more, because it was in peacetime, from a civilian, in a place where he was simply trying to exist. He didn't know that behind him, just a few feet away, Danielle Ortiz, the regional manager for the bank's Tri-County district, had just stopped mid-step. Danielle had come unannounced that morning. A spot inspection, review staffing, check protocols. She wasn't expecting fireworks, just some paperwork, an awkward sit-down with the branch manager, and then a quiet lunch. What she got instead was a front-row seat to one of the most tone-deaf customer interactions she'd ever witnessed. And she had heard every word Brenda said. Danielle turned to her assistant and said calmly, "Stay here." Then without raising her voice, she stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Everyone in the room turned their heads as she passed. Brenda finally noticed her. She blinked. "Oh, hi. Didn't know you were coming by today." Danielle didn't smile. "Clearly." Brenda glanced nervously around the lobby, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. She straightened her blouse, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and gave a laugh that didn't quite land. "Sorry you had to hear that. Just a difficult customer this morning. Slowing things down, you know?" Danielle tilted her head. "A difficult customer?" Brenda nodded quickly. "Yeah, that vet guy, Henry or something. Hands shaking so bad he couldn't even sign the check. I was trying to lighten the mood. You know how it is." Danielle's voice dropped to a tone that cut through the air like glass. "You humiliated a disabled veteran on a security-monitored floor in front of at least 8 witnesses." Brenda flushed. No, that's not what I was just being friendly." Danielle raised one hand. "Don't insult me with lies." The room was dead quiet. No one even pretended to be on their phones anymore. A pin could have dropped. Danielle looked past Brenda to the other teller, Melissa. "You heard her comments." Melissa hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Twice." The older couple in line stepped forward slightly. The man said, "I heard it too, loud and clear." The young mother added, "My son heard it. He asked me why she was being mean to the old man." Brenda's mouth opened, but no words came out. Danielle took a breath, then reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. She tapped a few times, opening the internal employee dashboard. Brenda watched as her name came up on the screen. "Effective immediately, I'm suspending your access to all financial systems," Danielle said calmly. "Your login credentials are being revoked, and your employee account is now frozen. You are not to return to the teller floor." Brenda's voice cracked. "Wait, suspended? Just like that?" "Pending termination review," Danielle clarified. "HR will be in touch within the hour." "But I didn't mean..." Danielle cut her off. "You didn't think. That's the problem." Then she turned finally toward the front door, where Henry stood still, unmoving. Danielle walked to him with a grace that didn't match her fury. "Sir," she said gently, "can I ask you to come with me for just a moment?" Henry looked unsure. "Ma'am, I wasn't trying to cause a scene." "You didn't," she replied softly. "She did." She guided him toward the private office in the corner, away from the crowd, but not before several people in line nodded to him, some respectfully, others apologetically. The teenager gave a small wave. The older woman mouthed, "Thank you." Brenda stood frozen at the counter, as if trying to process what had just happened. Her coworkers didn't meet her eyes. Melissa quietly pulled down the shutter on the next window. "Counter closed for break," she said more firmly than anyone expected. Brenda was alone now, the buzz of quiet murmurs growing behind her. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Inside, a man who had fought for his country was finally being treated with the dignity he'd always deserved. The quiet of the private office felt almost surreal compared to the tension still buzzing out on the teller floor. Henry Lawson sat on a leather chair that creaked under his weight, the cane resting beside him. His hands, though still unsteady, had calmed a bit, maybe from the warmth of the room, or maybe from the strange turn of events that had just unfolded. Across from him sat Danielle Ortiz, regional manager for Ridgeview Bank's Tri-County Division. She didn't touch the laptop in front of her, didn't shuffle papers. She just looked at him, eyes focused, professional, but not cold. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "I'm deeply sorry for what you experienced in our branch today." Henry gave a small shake of the head. "It's all right, ma'am. I didn't come here looking for sympathy." "I know," she replied, "but that doesn't mean you don't deserve it." He met her gaze, quiet and composed. "I've been through worse." "I'm sure you have," she said softly, "but not in my bank, and not on my watch." Henry didn't answer right away. He looked out the office window where the snowfall had thickened. A few children were pressing faces to the glass from outside, peeking in. Then he turned back, his voice low. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, lost friends, saw things I wouldn't want my worst enemy to remember, came home thinking I'd get back to a normal life. Turns out normal doesn't exist when you leave parts of yourself overseas." Danielle's expression tightened, not from discomfort, but from the weight of what he'd just said. "I believe that," she replied, "and I think it's shameful that the people you served would forget the price you paid." Henry gave a soft chuckle. "Most of them don't mean to. They're just busy living. That girl, Brenda, she's probably just having a bad day." Danielle leaned forward. "She's had many bad days, Mr. Lawson. You just gave us the proof we needed." That got his attention. Danielle opened a folder from her side. Inside were printed HR memos and employee complaints, 3 of them involving Brenda, 2 from customers, 1 from Melissa, the younger teller who had witnessed today's exchange. "She has a history," Danielle said. "This wasn't a one-time thing. Just the first time someone stood still long enough to let her hang herself with her own words." Henry frowned. "I didn't want anyone fired." Danielle shook her head. "You didn't get her fired. She did that herself. You just brought it into the light." He looked away again, clearly not comfortable with the attention. Danielle stood. "Mr. Lawson, with your permission, I'd like to correct something else, too." He looked up. She opened a drawer and pulled out a pristine black folder with the bank's logo embossed in gold. Inside was a document she slid across the desk toward him. "We've enrolled you in Ridgeview's Priority Access Program. Going forward, you'll have a designated banking advisor. No more waiting in lines. No more teller counters. You'll walk into any branch, this one or another, and someone will meet you by name, offer you a seat, and handle your needs with respect." Henry looked down at the document, clearly surprised. Danielle added, "There's no fee. And if anyone gives you anything less than their full respect, I want to hear about it directly. My cell number's in the folder." He blinked slowly. "That's a lot of fuss for an old soldier." "No, Mr. Lawson," she said firmly. "That's the bare minimum." There was a beat of silence, and then something shifted in Henry's face. Gratitude, yes, but more than that, a deep sense of being seen. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to smile. From outside the office, someone knocked gently. It was Melissa. Danielle stepped out to speak with her while Henry remained seated. A minute later, Danielle returned with something in her hands, a steaming cup of coffee, carefully balanced. "Melissa asked if you'd like this," she said, placing it in front of him. Henry blinked. "She didn't have to." "She wanted to," Danielle said simply. He took the cup, hands trembling slightly as he brought it to his lips. It wasn't just coffee, it was recognition. A gesture, small but meaningful. After years of being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed, this moment felt oddly large. Outside the office, the lobby atmosphere had completely changed. Brenda was gone. The bank manager, who had returned mid-crisis, was now at the teller counter himself, working side by side with Melissa to clear the line. The older couple waved at Henry through the glass as they left. The teenager in the hoodie gave him a thumbs up before walking out into the snow. Danielle walked Henry to the front door personally. As they reached it, she turned to him one final time. "If you ever feel like the world's forgotten you, Mr. Lawson, I want you to remember this day." He nodded slowly. "I will. And if there's ever anything Ridgeview Bank can do for you, anything at all, you don't wait in line. You call me directly." Henry gave her a long, thoughtful look. "You ever served?" "No," she said, "but I was raised by someone who did. My father. Vietnam." He extended a trembling hand, not for support, but for a handshake. She took it without hesitation. "Your dad would be proud of you," he said. Danielle smiled. "And I think a whole lot of people would be proud of you, Mr. Lawson." As he stepped outside into the snow, a few people held the door for him. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't in years. Not just respected, he felt honored. By the time Henry stepped back into his modest one-bedroom apartment that afternoon, the snow had thickened into a quiet, unrelenting curtain. His boots left faint wet prints across the floor, but he didn't mind. He placed his cane against the wall, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the black folder Danielle had given him. It still didn't feel real. Not the priority service, not the apology, not the handshake that came with no pity, only respect. And certainly not what happened next. Across town, in a sleek, high-rise office adorned with mahogany panels and frosted glass, Kara Linwood, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for Ridgeview National, was reviewing her inbox when a flagged email appeared. Subject: Urgent Regional Escalation. Brenda Haskins, Ridgeview Branch, number 242. It had come straight from Danielle Ortiz. Time-stamped, attached with surveillance footage, a transcript, customer statements, and a digital complaint from Melissa, the junior teller. Kara didn't even finish the coffee in her hand before calling an emergency session with the bank's Internal Ethics Committee. By 4:30 p.m., Brenda Haskins was sitting awkwardly in a Zoom meeting with HR, union reps, and compliance officers. Her voice was defensive, but her eyes gave it away. She knew this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. "This is ridiculous," she said, arms crossed. "I've worked here 5 years, never had a real complaint stick." One of the HR reps calmly clicked a file. A video clip played, Brenda at the teller counter, smirking, mocking Henry's tremors. Then came the audio. "We're not a therapy center." Brenda shrunk slightly in her seat. "That's taken out of context," she argued, weaker this time. "He was slowing down the line. He could have just used online banking." "You're not being evaluated on his speed," said the compliance officer. "You're being held accountable for your words." Another clip played. This time, a customer's voice from the lobby. "That was out of line, lady." Brenda's termination wasn't just swift. It was unanimous. Her badge access was revoked. Her final paycheck was withheld pending legal review due to a possible ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act violation, and her name was quietly flagged in Ridgeview's internal database for do not rehire nationwide. Back at the local branch, Danielle wasn't done either. She issued an internal memo, company-wide, about what had happened. No names were shared, but the message was crystal clear. Any employee found mocking or mistreating a veteran or a disabled customer will be subject to immediate review with zero tolerance. Honor is not optional. It's our standard. The memo went viral internally. Dozens of employees across branches replied to Danielle directly thanking her. Many were veterans themselves or had family who served. One branch manager in Ohio wrote, "I've worked here 12 years. That memo made me prouder than any annual report ever has." The bank's CEO, Martin Langston, saw the chain and added a note of his own. "Danielle, thank you for turning an ugly moment into a culture-defining one. I want a letter of apology sent to the veteran involved. I will sign it myself." And he did. 3 days later, Henry received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a formal apology on executive stationery, signed in ink, not printed, by Ridgeview's CEO. It acknowledged the mistreatment, commended his service, and committed to permanent policy changes in his name. The Lawson Standard, the accompanying document, made it official. All Ridgeview branches nationwide would implement priority banking for veterans and disabled individuals, with mandatory annual training to ensure dignity and respect. Henry just sat there staring at the letter for several long minutes. His fingers trembled, not from his condition this time, but from the flood of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Justice. Real, undeniable, visible justice. The next morning, when he returned to the same branch, not out of habit but to test the truth of it, everything was different. Melissa was the first to greet him, standing beside the branch manager. "Mr. Lawson," she said warmly, "your advisor is waiting for you in the conference room." He was escorted past the line, past the lobby, and into a room with coffee, warm lights, and a manila folder already open with his name on it. No keen glances, no fake smiles, just genuine care. As he signed a few forms, his hand still shaking, but now with no one watching like he was broken, the manager said, "Sir, if there's anything you need, banking or otherwise, you come straight to me." And then, as if it were rehearsed, the team behind him stood and gave him something he hadn't received in years, a quiet, respectful salute. One by one, Henry blinked, lips parting slightly in disbelief. He wasn't wearing a uniform, wasn't on a base, but here they were, civilians, co-workers, strangers, saluting him, because he deserved it, because the system didn't fail him this time, because one moment of cruelty had triggered a chain reaction of conscience, policy, and corporate reckoning. As he stepped outside into the mid-morning sunlight, the snow had stopped. The air felt different, crisper, cleaner. People in line watched him go. Some nodded. One clapped softly. He didn't need a parade. This was enough, more than enough. That night, Henry Lawson sat on his small porch with a blanket over his knees, a hot cup of cocoa in his hand, and the letter from Ridgeview's CEO resting on the side table. The letter wasn't framed yet, but it would be. Not for pride, not for show, but for what it meant. That dignity still mattered. He watched as his neighbor's porch light flickered on. A little girl across the street waved at him from behind a frosted window. He waved back, his tremors slight, but no longer something he hid. For so long, Henry had felt like a ghost, the kind people remembered only on Veterans Day, the kind who stood in line quietly, smiled politely, and never made a fuss. Because veterans like him were taught to endure, to adapt, to press on without complaint. But for the first time in years, he felt something shifting, not just inside himself, but in the world around him. Earlier that day, he'd received a call from Melissa, the young teller. She wasn't required to reach out, but she had. "Mr. Lawson," she said, voice gentle, "I just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't just change the way we treat people in our branch. You reminded us why we do this." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't do anything special," he told her. "Just stood there and let someone show the world who they really were." But Melissa didn't agree. "You showed the rest of us who we should be." After hanging up, Henry had sat in his recliner for a long time, thinking about that moment at the bank. Brenda's voice sharp and mocking. The quiet hurt that had stabbed deeper than any battlefield injury. Not because it was loud, but because it was so casual. But now, that one cruel moment had echoed all the way up the ladder. It had made executives take notice. It had reshaped company policy. It had brought apologies, reforms, and something far rarer in today's world. And all because Henry hadn't yelled, hadn't made a scene. He had simply stood his ground, with dignity, not defiance. A few days later, Henry visited the local VA clinic. As he walked in, the receptionist greeted him with a wide smile. "Mr. Lawson, we saw the memo from Ridgeview. You're famous around here." He chuckled. "Didn't mean to be." "Well, you are, and you've done more than you think." On the bulletin board behind the front desk was a new flyer. Now partnered with Ridgeview Bank, veteran priority services available at all branches. He stood there for a moment, letting the weight of those words sink in. At the clinic, another veteran, missing a leg, pushing a walker, rolled up beside him and whispered, "You the guy from the bank?" Henry turned, surprised. "How'd you know?" "The tremors," the man said with a knowing nod. "I got them too." He extended a calloused hand. Henry shook it. "You made it easier for the rest of us, brother," the man added. That hit different. Not like a compliment. More like a salute without words. Henry didn't need public praise. or ceremonies, or interviews. He just needed moments like this, quiet acknowledgments that the battle for dignity hadn't been in vain. And slowly, over the next few weeks, the ripples grew. More veterans began visiting Ridgeview branches, some cautiously, some defiantly. But they were met with respect, with training that stuck, with advisors who knew better, because the story of what happened to Henry had become more than a memo. It had become a warning and a standard. The Lawson Standard, as some branches began calling it. Even Danielle Ortiz, the regional manager, sent him a follow-up email. "We've made the training program permanent. Your story is now part of our onboarding materials. Every new hire learns how to treat people like you with the respect you've always deserved." And then, almost like fate smiling down, the mayor's office reached out. They invited Henry to speak at the Veterans Day ceremony. At first, he declined. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But when they offered to have Melissa introduce him, he agreed. On the day of the ceremony, Henry stepped onto the podium, cane in hand, medals on his chest. Not to boast, but to remind people that honor still had a place in everyday life. "I'm not here today because I fought overseas," he told the crowd. "I'm here because someone reminded me and reminded others that the fight for respect doesn't end when the uniform comes off." A hush fell over the crowd. It takes one person standing quietly for the world to realize it's been sitting down too long. When he stepped off that stage, dozens of people stood and applauded, not because he was a hero, but because he was a mirror reflecting who we should be. And as Henry Lawson walked back to his seat, hand trembling, heart steady, he realized something. Justice didn't always come with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a young teller's apology, a bank's policy change, a letter signed by a CEO, and a quiet handshake from someone who finally understood. Subscribe for daily stories that prove one quiet act can change everything.